Hello, everyone. We are going to get started in just a minute or two when we make sure that all of our audience members have joined us. So please sit tight and we will be with you very soon. Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Diani Faiga. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. My pronouns are she and her, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to this second in our dialogue series around various issues of diversity and inclusion in the field of collections care. As with the previous session, I'm largely going to turn this over to our facilitator, Sarah Ferrone, but I have a few pieces of housekeeping before we begin. First off, I just want to extend a huge thank you to our primary funder for this initiative, the National Endowment for the Humanities. I know there are some new faces here today who did not join us for the first session in December. So let me give you just a very quick overview of the structure of these sessions. So we are hoping to contribute to some of the incredibly significant work that is being done elsewhere toward building a DEIA infrastructure within collections care that can be sustainable beyond this moment in history. Our goal is not to present a definitive guidebook on the topics, but rather to work on building the guide together as a community. So each of these sessions, which, as I mentioned, began in December and will continue for over the course of the next few months, each of these sessions focuses on a different issue facing the field and will be comprised of two components: a traditional webinar with speakers highlighting their own observations in the field, and then the following day, tomorrow, a community dialogue led by our facilitator. As each topic is discussed and processed together, key takeaways will be compiled and used to build a publicly available resource document that can serve as a toolkit for individuals looking to begin or expand this work at their own organizations. The toolkit for session 1 is available online, and I think Alana will be dropping the link in the chat shortly, so you can go and check that out. So logistics and housekeeping before we jump in. First off, if you would like to follow along with closed captions, you may need to activate that setting within your Zoom interface. Toward the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a box that says CC Live Transcript, or it may be under the More option. If you click that and then click Show Subtitle, there may be a lag, but then they should appear. Today's event is set up as a webinar, which among other things means that participants, audience members cannot actually speak and interact beyond typing in the chat box. Don't fret, tomorrow will be set up as a Zoom meeting, so we'll all be able to have a healthy discussion, and I'll give you some more housekeeping tips on navigating that when we meet tomorrow. But what that means for today is if you have questions for our one live speaker, please enter those in the chat. While our discussions tomorrow and on all the subsequent second days of sessions will not be recorded for issues of privacy, vulnerability, and the conversational tone we hope to strike, this initial content portion is being recorded, including anything contained in the chat box. The transcript created through closed captions will be retained and available for all portions of the sessions. We're retaining this information, for one thing, in order to aid in creation of the toolkit I mentioned. And I will say more about this at the end of tomorrow's session, but I just wanted all of you to be able to get on your calendars now that the next event in this series will be on January 24th and 25th, when we will consider some internal advocacy for institutional change. And with that, I am going to introduce and then turn things over to our facilitator, Sarah Ferrone. Sarah is the principal of Dialogic Consulting, where she brings over 20 years of facilitation and training experience to every project, helping make hard conversations productive and enabling teams to work more effectively. In the interest of having a bit more time with the content, I will forego the rest of Sarah's bio today and pass things along to her. So thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I so look forward to digging into our conversations today and for the future sessions that Diani was mentioning. I also wanted to express my appreciation for the time and energy of Margalit Schindler and Alana Schaefer, both of CCAHA, who are going to be taking notes during today's session and are also the primary authors of each session's toolkit. And it's a wonderful joy to have the ability to facilitate while working with other folks within the process. I'm grateful this morning for many things and would like to also acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home where I join you from in northern New Jersey, the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands each of us sit, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing many of the institutions that we work for and with. To get us started today, it is my pleasure to introduce our colleagues and speakers for today's session, Sarah Nunberg and Joanna Hurd. Sarah Nunberg is unfortunately not able to join us live today, but has kindly recorded her comments for us this afternoon and is happy to receive emails from any of our attendees so that she can more effectively respond to your questions. Sarah has been in private practice as an objects conservator in Brooklyn, New York since 2006, and has become a leading expert in life cycle assessment, LCA, for sustainable practices in cultural heritage through her work as a principal investigator for a Tier 1 and Tier 2 National Endowment of Humanities grant to create STICH, Sustainable Tools in Cultural Heritage, including an LCA library and carbon calculator supported by FAIC. Along with continuing her private practice, Sarah teaches materials properties at Pratt Institute and was awarded the 2021-22 Adele Chatfield Taylor Rome Prize in Historic Preservation and Conservation for continuing her work with LCA. Sarah received her advanced certificate in conservation and her MA in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts Conservation Center at New York University in 1994, and her MA in archaeology from Yale University in 1990. Sarah is joined today by Joanna Hurd. As a paper conservation fellow at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, Joanna assesses condition and treatment needs, documents findings and reports, and treats a wide range of objects, including works of art on paper and archival materials. As a conservation advocate and activist, Joanna helps to develop programs related to access and equity, and has a passion for getting students of all ages excited about the intersection of art and science. Joanna spent 5 years exploring the different fields of conservation before specializing in paper with a minor in photograph conservation in graduate school. She has since interned at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Weissman Preservation Center, and the American Philosophical Society. She received an MA in art conservation from the Winter/University of Delaware program in art conservation and a BA in art history from Boston University. So what are we talking about? Working in cultural heritage, we often consider materiality daily, but how often do we think about the materials that we use to care for our heritage? This talk will reflect on our responsibilities and address some of our powers as consumers, and explore how we can make a social and environmental impact through the work purchases we make and considered consumption. So let's talk about it. With this, I'll turn it back to Alana Schaefer, who will begin Sarah's video for all of us to work from.
Hi, my name is Sarah Nunberg. I'm an objects conservator in Brooklyn, New York. I also teach at Pratt Institute material degradations as a conservator in the Math and Science department. I'm going to talk to you today about a carbon calculator and library of case studies and information sheets that I'm on a team creating as part of a National Endowment for Humanities grant. And I'm excited to talk about this topic of consuming materials, resources, and how we take control of it as consumers. The title of the talk is Examining STICH. STICH stands for Sustainability Tools for Conservation and Cultural Heritage. We have a big team of students and professionals who have worked on this project, and they've just been invaluable to this project. It's just been amazing what the work they've done. So to tell you a little bit about the project so that you can understand how it relates to consuming materials and to reducing our consumption or making educated choices in our consumption. I began learning about life cycle assessment, which I'm going to be calling LCA. That's the short term for it. Back in 2012, when I was on the Sustainability Committee for AIC as a conservator. And at that point, I became very interested in life cycle assessment and then looking at other ways to work sustainably and make sustainable choices in my work. And I learned about LCA, and I invited Matt Eckelman. I became connected with him through doing a lot of research to speak about LCA in Albuquerque at the AIC meeting. And at that point, in 2016, a partnership was formed with Pam Hatchfield, who was also very interested in this work, who was a objects conservator at the MFA in Boston. And we did the first 4 LCAs listed here. And then after that, we began, we realized that conservation and custodians of cultural heritage for exhibition, and who work towards exhibition and who work towards preservation of cultural heritage, that our field, the materials we use and the actions we take are a perfect situation for creating a real discrete calculator for all the materials that we use, and that this was a great way for us as professionals to really evaluate our work and start making changes. So we applied for a National Endowment for Humanities grant, Tier 1 and then Tier 2 grant. And we've been working on this, and our completion date to create this full calculator and this full library of studies will be done this summer. It got postponed a little bit from COVID. So just to tell you a little bit about what life cycle assessment is, and then I'll show you a couple of our case studies and the tool we've created, and always thinking about really how this is so useful for us making, really the goal is for us to be able to make educated choices and impactful choices in our work, for really choosing more sustainable pathways. And through these educated choices, we can choose sustainable pathways and not choose things that we think are more sustainable but actually aren't. So in making these choices and in doing these studies, life cycle assessment is a very helpful tool. It's a systems modeling tool for quantifying the total resource inputs and environmental burdens of a particular product. So if we look at something that we all know about, which is life cycle of a newspaper, we would first look at how the newspaper is made, so material production and the natural resources. And then we'd look at the product manufacturing. We'd look at all the energy, materials, water use that goes into it, that goes into actually making the paper, and then printing the paper, the ink, and then distributing it, transportation of the newspaper from the production site to the user. And then once the user's done with this newspaper, what happens to it, the end of life, if it's recycling or if it's recycled or disposal. And all that has an environmental impact. And our choices of how these actions are done really influences the impact, the resulting impact. So when we carry out a life cycle assessment, we follow something called ISO 1440 standard, and it really defines how life cycle assessments are carried out. So you really need to look at the framework and look at the goal and scope of the project. Then you create an inventory analysis, which is literally an inventory in an Excel chart of everything you're using and organizing it in that way. And then you look at the impact assessment. And this is an iterative process. It goes back and forth with the interpretation. And the interpretation is really an involved method that takes a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge on the LCA practitioner's part. So this is what we've created at this point and it's free. It's accessible to anyone, whether you're an AIC member or not, on the AIC website, because this is an FAIC project. The website is stitch.culturalheritage.org. Actually, that's stitch@culturalheritage.org. And on that, you'll find a carbon calculator, which includes cultural heritage products. We have about 1,200 items now. So it would be acid-free cardboard, heritage board, B72, adhesives, glues, many, many categories. And then we have a range of case studies.
And just bear with us. I think Alana's trying to play with our sound and make sure that our recording's okay.
Hold on one second.
Talk about this topic of the project. At this point, and it's free. It's accessible to anyone, whether you're an AIC member or not, on the AIC website, because this is an FAIC project. The website is stitch.culturalheritage.org. Actually, that's stitch@culturalheritage.org. And on that, you'll find a carbon calculator, which includes cultural heritage products. We have about 1,200 items now. So it would be acid-free cardboard, heritage board, B72, adhesives, glues, many, many categories. And then we have a range of case studies, which I'm going to talk about a couple of the ones that we've done at this point. And then information sheets, which relate to topics taught in STICH, such as what is a life cycle assessment? How does the carbon calculator work? At what cost are we doing our work? So some of the case studies you'll see here are base materials in rigid gels. That hasn't been done yet. We have done backing boards. You'll find that on our website. We will be doing comparison of methods of fabric for lining, historic windows, and we're working on Anoxia now, which I'll talk to you about a little bit. And then these are some of the information sheets and the carbon calculator. This is what the carbon calculator looks like. I'm not going to actually do it here. I'm not going to actually access the website because in a presentation it can get kind of messed up. But here's the site. And so first you go to the area here on the carbon calculator page on the website. And you can either browse items or you can search items. So under browsing items, if you click the category, you can see chemicals, and a whole list comes up, and I've chosen chemicals and solvents. And then subcategory, a whole list of different categories. I've chosen organic, and then I put in ethanol, and then you click add. And here is a chart that comes up, and here are the actual numbers that come up, values that are coming up. And So here you can see in comparing, I did a comparison of acetone, benzyl alcohol, ethanol, and 2 different types of water. And you can see the impact of these three, mostly of these 3 materials. We know water is going to be so much lower. And so if you have a treatment where you can either use acetone, benzyl alcohol, or ethanol, here you would choose ethanol. Now, but what if it takes 10 times the amount of ethanol to do the same project that it would take that much less acetone? So then you would put those numbers, the milliliters of amounts that you're going to guess that you're going to use or that you actually know you use in here, and then you'll see the greenhouse gas emissions per unit. So we also have our information sheets, and one that I think is very pertinent to this conference is at what cost are we doing our work? And it talks about, you know, how many people are actually at NAIC, and then PAC-in, professional art handlers, IMLS, and so given these numbers, you see that there are a lot of people working with these materials. So even though if an industry they may use tons and tons of acetone and we just use a couple milliliters, it all does add up. I mean, why are we recycling at home? We're recycling at home because that also all adds up. So at work, it also all adds up. So one of the case studies that we have complete, it looks at crates, 1-way, 2-way, and reusable. We looked at standard crates that has objects for less than 72 hours, and then the packaging gets thrown out. So the packaging isn't having very much contact with the material for a very long time. So our goal is to identify the crate materials by the degree of impact. And we looked at 4 different scenarios. For every LCA, we define the scope. So that's the cradle to gate study, meaning production of the material to use of the material, not to disposal. And then we define something called a functional unit. And in this functional unit, it's the unit by which the study is functioning and the materials that we're using are functioning. So here we define this specific crate for flatworks, for paint, for paintings, and then the specific size crate for 3-dimensional works. So we have 4 scenarios: single use with birch, and so the shell will be birchwood, and then we're using ethafoam strips. Standard, which is used 2-way, using MDO plywood and 2-inch urethane foam sheets. Museum 2-way, which is MDO plywood and ester foam, and also has more to the shell, as you'll see. And then reusable, which is a fiberglass resin shell with U-foam. And if you look at the impacts, this was for the round trip type 1 and 2 urethane and ester foam. Density was assumed to be 7.8. So that's a much higher density than the second study in general, which was the density was assumed to be 1.55 pounds per cubic foot. And you can see that the round trip type 1 and round trip type 2 has a much higher impact in the higher density foam than in the lower density foam. The reusable has a much lower impact, even though you would think that being made of a fiberglass shell versus a wood shell, because it's used 200 times. So the amount of use for the reusable brings the impact down incredibly. In our case study, you can see more discussion about disposal, transportation of the crates, and what each one of these single trips, round trip, are actually made of. We also tried to look at options, alternatives for the products. So if we know that the foams have such a high impact, what can we use instead? It was very difficult to find materials. We did come across, and as many people know now, mycelium foam, which is a biomaterial. And the problem is that we did ODDI tests on this. Eric Breitong at the Met did an ODDI test on it, and it had horrible numbers, and so you would never want it interacting for long term with say a metal piece or something that's more reactive. But I think as conservators and as custodians of cultural heritage, we really have to think of what are the parameters that we're setting, and what are the choices we're making. If something's really just in a crate for 72 hours, and if you put wrapping around the piece that is going to prevent it from having real contact during this short term, maybe we can consider materials that are not non-reactive as we're looking for in general, because the impact will be so much lower in terms of environmental impacts, and we can make more educated choices. So another study that we've just been completing is looking at low oxygen environments that are used for insect eradication and for low oxygen environment for long-term storage of oxygen-sensitive materials. We looked at different times. 5 weeks would be for insect eradication, and then 1 year and 5 years would be for long-term storage. And then we looked at 3 different methods using ageless, argon, and nitrogen. We also used a case study for the we were working with the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation and a student from Winterthur, Chris Knossen, and we were looking at packing in a low oxygen environment for maintaining this Robert Rauschenberg piece. There's a strip of rubber and masking tape, all of which last much longer with low oxygen environment. So we were looking at the impact of the anoxic storage and the energy use. And the goal and scope is the impact to sustain the low environment from cradle to grave. And here's just a flow chart of what we looked at. This is the size of the enclosure, and we compared ageless, which include ageless. We did not include silica gel, and then we also include the nitrogen purge, and then nitrogen, low oxygen, and argon. And we looked at it for 5 years, 1 year, and 5 weeks, 1 year, and 5 years. This is the results from the 5-week pest remediation treatment. And you can see here that the ageless, it's without the nitrogen purge, has the lowest impact in terms of global warming. For the plastic enclosure, which remained the same for all of them, but for the ageless material itself, it's much lower than the gas setup for the nitrogen purge. And then the gas treatment, it's non-existent. And then you can see the argon is just the highest impact, and the reason why argon is so high is because there's much more nitrogen in the air than argon, so it's much easier to separate nitrogen and isolate nitrogen than it is for argon. So it takes much less energy. So once you get into ageless with a nitrogen purge, you have the nitrogen having lower impact. So if you have the choice between using the gases, nitrogen or argon, obviously use nitrogen. And if you have the choice between ageless and nitrogen, this depends on on your method. Oops. This is the 5-year Anoxia treatment. So the longer anything is used for, the less impact it has per year. So because you're using it for so much longer, the impact goes down. So this is for the 5-year anoxic treatment. It's still, the argon is so high. So we hope that that you will look at our carbon calculator and look at our library of case studies. They're going to keep coming up. You'll see the next one will be the ageless, the Anoxia study, and then we're also working on a study right now looking at comparing animal glues and water-based plant glues with one acrylic adhesive, B72. We're carrying out that study right now. We're also publishing on our website our study that we published in 2016 in JIC about loans. And we have many others that will continue to come up through the summer. We're hoping to continue this project even after the NEH grant is over. This spring, I will be working on disseminating this material. We're hopefully working on also putting together an exhibition for the AIC meeting in LA this May. So please come and visit us at our exhibition booth. And we're also looking for international expansion, adding international items that are used internationally, so we can all begin to make more educated choices and really start changing our work so that it is impactful towards sustainability. Again, here are the people who have been just incredibly effective in this work. And thank you for your attention during this talk. And please feel free to email me or to look on our website and email us if you have any questions. Okay.
So as we begin to turn things over to Joanna, I'm just wanting to take a minute to acknowledge again that Sarah's email address has been added to the chat box, so please feel free to take use of that. Specifically for questions that are really about kind of the work itself, how you can use the team, the sites, the resources. I know that she would be only too happy to hear from you. But another point, and pursuant to what Joanna is going to talk about, is this project, and STICH is a great example of how we can look at data-based work and structural work in order to create larger cross-institutional change, right? Which is really the overarching concept that we're exploring throughout this series. With that in mind, the tools that Joanna is thinking about are a little different than the tools that you'll see that Sarah had spoken about. But the concept of creating change and enabling the field to develop resources through which to substantiate and move that change forward is similar. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joanna.
Thanks, Sarah. Let me just share my screen. So first, I just want to say thanks to Sarah Nunberg and everyone at the LCA and STICH website for all of their amazing work and taking the time to share it today. The environmental impact of our decisions as consumers really can't be understated, and neither can the social impacts or the potential for social impacts. The pandemic has been a time of grappling with a lot of disparities throughout our infrastructures and norms. And one of the topics that came up at the Conservation Center is where we're getting our materials from. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot in my personal life, but wasn't really something I had thought of in a professional context until a little over a year ago. We were putting together a colloquium to discuss accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a part of that, I started looking into resources for finding businesses owned or operated by people of color, women, or people in the LGBTQ+ community. And very few existed, and none were specific to the types of businesses that we would need in a cultural heritage context. And so that's what I set out to start. So the goals were to raise awareness of and support for small businesses, particularly those owned by BIPOC, LGBTQ+ communities or women, or were operated by those communities. And we wanted to do this because I think it's an important way of considering using our consumer power in a responsible way in collections care. And also, we are very much hoping this will be an evolving resource that will grow with your involvement. So here is a preview of the vendor list, and it is still very small and very, it's growing. It's still a work in progress, and hopefully with your help, it will grow a lot more. But it also kind of reflects what the data has been showing for how the pandemic has affected these small businesses. So even in the first couple months of the pandemic, the impact on businesses owned by Black, immigrant, Latinx, and Asian communities was almost double that of white-owned businesses or businesses owned by men. And the opportunities for receiving funding were a lot less, even though the study that I pulled this graphic from cites that the application rates were about the same. And it's a similar scenario for employee challenges. People in Black, Hispanic, Latino, LGBTQ plus communities are, again, at a higher rate of employment instability, and resultant cuts in their own spending and ability to support themselves. And so, and not shown here, but people in the transgender community are more than twice as likely to be unemployed and receive 30% less salary than people in the cisgender community of commensurate education and skill. So things look maybe a little bleak, and I know for myself, it's been hard to not feel a little powerless. And so working on this list has been a way to address these issues in my own life, and both professionally and personally, and have some level of impact, even though, you know, I have no illusions that this will suddenly fix everything, but the ability to make a change in my life that I know is making my practices more aligned with my values has been pretty much a part of my self-care. And I'm very much hoping that it will be similar for others. Some of the considerations that we've put into this list when I was looking at businesses to start compiling the list, the first and foremost was, how are the businesses publicly identifying? Because you may know someone who's running a business who is in the LGBTQ plus community, but has not included that as part of their business story. And so if you are outing them without them having already identified for themselves, you could be putting them at risk. So that was one of the big considerations, was how the businesses were self-identified. And part of how I was finding that was going to their about pages, and also looking for their statements on diversity and equity, because a number of businesses will have some statement about being committed to this work, but then they might not have the actual actions to back it up. So that was one of the other places I was looking. There are lists, federal and state lists of minority-owned businesses. They can be a little hard to navigate, and that's something I'm trying to grapple with for this list as well. Extrapolating data from those so that you wouldn't necessarily have to go there, but also I have been including directories in the vendor list so that even more generally, you have some places to start looking. And then considerations that will be going into the list in the future, hopefully near future, are the locality, so that people can start considering the shipping costs and sustainability of where they're purchasing from as well. And if you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us. There is a form you can fill out on the link to the vendor list, where you can add request additions, but you can also feel free to email us. Yeah, so there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make our world a little more equitable, but I hope today has kind of helped share some opportunities for making changes in your own life.
Thank you, Joanna. Now, for all of you who are joining us, as Deani explained, at this session, we can receive questions and comments via the chat box that Joanna and I will be able to see, in addition to the opportunity to send Sarah your questions and comments via email. And we'll make sure that things that were added to the chat box are also sent to Sarah so that she can see that log moving forward. So please feel free to chime in the chat box if you have questions or comments or things that you would like to kind of turn over to Joanna and or I or other folks from CCAHA. In the meantime, though, I did want to get us started with one question for you, Joanna, and then we can work from there with the time that we have left today, which is that, you know, you spoke a little bit when you began your section on your experience during the pandemic, your evolution individually as a professional, and your considerations and the changes that you've been making throughout your life, right, both personally and professionally, around equity and inclusion, possibly around sustainability. And I wonder if you could talk with us a little bit about the challenges of navigating your own personal priorities, right, versus institutional priorities, right, for work like what you're doing now. And this may be something from other, you know, positions and internships in the past, or really just kind of what that experience has been like, as we all consider it.
Yeah, thank you. It has been challenging, especially because there are so many points at which you kind of hit a wall and you just can't make more progress at that moment, personally and professionally. But then in a professional context, recognizing that there are a lot of different bureaucratic or administrative avenues that you'd have to get through to make changes. So it's, I think, slower in my professional life than my personal life, which I think is fair. I think there has to be a little bit of grace and acceptance for the disparity between personal and professional achievements in this regard, but still pushing for the next better stage. So I'm really fortunate that the Conservation Center has been so supportive of this work and are committed to making these changes. But again, I can just make the change in my personal life of, well, I don't like this vendor anymore, I'm just going to this other place. I don't have that same opportunity in a professional setting. And so just acknowledging that it takes a little more time, a little more conversation, and not being angry at myself or my institution for trying and not succeeding in that moment, because I know that I will keep pushing until it happens for everybody. So yeah, I think that a little bit of grace and patience has been very helpful.
You know, you mentioned the idea of change is slower, right, in a professional space, which makes sense, right? It's less in our individual control. We're balancing the interests of multiple, right, people, as well as organizational mission and vision and alignment. And I wonder, and this is something that for all of you who are with us, I truly hope that we can dig into tomorrow with greater detail, because I find in my work, especially in working in spaces of equity and authenticity and engagement and integrity, it comes up all the time, which is our work is about people. We like to say it's about objects and artifacts and conservation and things, but it's really about people. And when in those lines of work, when we're doing that, right, we have relationships with vendors, right? There are people behind these products, or there are consultants, right, that are doing much of this work, or that we're contracting out with. And one of the things that people often talk to or greet me with is a concern, right? About how do I make those changes when I have great relationships with folks, right? Who aren't, identified within more diverse or BIPOC spaces. Tell me a little bit about that. What that's looked like, what you're hearing from folks as you're putting together this list. Not necessarily saying this is the answer, but saying these are the concerns that we're hearing so that hopefully tomorrow we can continue to discuss it in greater detail.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And so far, the response to the vendor list has been really positive. I think most people have recognized that no one's just immediately throwing out 20-year-long relationships with a vendor, but keeping it in mind and being open to new avenues of partnership has been part of the response. So I think in general, people are very open to this type of change, but again, maybe aren't making that change as quickly as I would like or as they would like, because we're really not trying to condemn anyone for choosing a vendor that doesn't align with personal or institutional values, because it's a less than ideal vendor and a less than ideal system. And I think generally the awareness of that has been pretty high. I think did that answer?
It does.
Okay.
Thanks. And for all of you who are tuned in and with us now, please let us know if you have questions specifically for Joanna, observations about the work that you've been doing, right? Or whether it be about the vendor list that Joanna created individually or with how you are navigating, right? That space. Whether we can talk about them now or segue them into the conversation tomorrow, right? But we'd love for those to be documented in the chat for ourselves, as we continue going forward and discussing this with each other.
I did get some feedback when I presented this during the colloquium that some institutions, bigger institutions, were starting to have these conversations in their own departments. I unfortunately have not heard any follow-ups, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that something good came of it. But I find it very heartening that these conversations have been happening more and more frequently. Mm-hmm. People are really taking it into consideration.
I think it's really interesting you raised that point about that one of your criteria as you were beginning to assemble the list was looking for outward statements, right, of equity and inclusion or what people were saying. And with an acknowledgement that sometimes we make statements without actually backing it up with changes in courses of action. So I want to make sure to re-emphasize that point that you raised, because it is so vital to this work, right, moving forward. And with a note that, your work is an attempt in taking some action, right, in that space. And I'll share, without having Sarah on this call, as a consultant, I just had my first client ask me for my sustainability statement. As well, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I'm wondering if, as you were researching and looking at a lot of these institutions, is that something you're seeing that is common? Is that something that we should all be thinking about as well in the work that we're doing and moving forward?
I definitely think it's important to be thinking about. I think the more accessible and transparent your statements are, or your institutional views are, because it is becoming a bigger consideration for consumers to be looking for people who are making these kinds of actions. I think it's ultimately beneficial to the institution to just be open and upfront. And I think the fear is often that not enough has been done, rather than focusing on the work that is being attempted. So the try is just as important, I think, as the end result. And so having a statement that says, look, we recognize that we're not where we want to be, but here's where we want to be, and this is what we've done to try and get there. those were statements that I thought were very worthwhile, and I included businesses on the list if they had that kind of statement too. Yeah, so I think it's really only beneficial to everybody to be really open about these kinds of issues. One other thing I wanted to say was there were some directories that businesses had to self-report to be included on. And so they might not have a statement self-identifying as a BIPOC or women-owned company, but they self-submitted to be a part of the directory. And so that's where it kind of gets into this weird gray area, and why I really want this to be a community source tool so that everyone can weigh in on the gray areas, because there are so many. But self-identifying in that space versus having a set aside statement, because a lot of smaller businesses might not have someone who either they're paying someone outside of their institution to handle their website, or they don't have someone dedicated to making statements like that, and it might seem overwhelming or kind of inaccessible to them. So looking at the alternatives for self-identifying is also something that I was keeping in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about also, and one of the things I think would be great for us to talk about tomorrow, as well, is the continuing the work that you're moving forward with, right, and creating kind of this this database, I guess. That's not, well, yeah, I guess a database.
Eventually a database.
Eventually a database, hopefully, of resources and groups and vendors who are doing great work, right, and are coming from historically marginalized spaces. I think a little bit about what our obligation is, right, as vendors or consultants whose history is not coming from a historically marginalized space, and what is our responsibility, right, in pushing to make move the field forward in work that we take on, in work that we decline, in the way that we price our work, right, in terms of what is reasonable and competitive, and what that means, right, for those of us who have benefited from years of, historic precedents, right, as well. So I do hope for all of you who are with us, that's something that we can explore in greater depth tomorrow, as we begin to really look at our personal and collective responsibility, right, around all of these issues, using tools like those that both Sarah and Joanna shared for us today. And Margalit, thank you so much for the comment about seeing the possible intersection of these two projects. I appreciated that as well. I liked hearing, Joanna, that that's a field that you're looking at expanding into with the database, thinking about sustainability and proximity in project. With all of that in mind, I want to be very conscious of our time. Dayani has a few last things to say to prepare us for tomorrow's session or any of the other dates that are coming up with our sessions. So let me take this opportunity from my perspective to thank you, Joanna, for your involvement and your presence here today, to thank all of you who are on the call for your sustained attention as Joanna and I got to talk a little bit, and hoping that you heard some things that you're excited to dig into in a little bit of greater depth tomorrow. Dayani?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Joanna, and thank you to Sarah Nunberg for recording her presentation and for, again, making herself available for questions if anyone is interested in following up with her. I don't have too much to say right now, but I do just want to mention that I hope that everyone here as audience members today will be able to join us tomorrow to discuss some of the questions and concepts that we started thinking about today in a facilitated discussion. So it will be set up to be an interactive conversation among all of us. It is a separate link, which you should have in the same confirmation email where you got the one. where you got this one, excuse me. So we'll see you all at the same time tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. And I hope that you come ready to think and discuss. And thanks again to our speakers today. Thanks to Sarah Ferrone for being the facilitator. And thanks again to the National Endowment for the Humanities for being our primary funder for this initiative. So see you all tomorrow. Take care.